In a high-stakes televised showdown, Leavitt faced off against a veteran journalist in a battle of wits that left the entire studio speechless. This isn't just an interview, it's a revolution against gatekeeping and outdated hierarchies. Welcome to Epic Stories, where we reveal the moments that redefine the narrative. If you're moved by bold truths and fierce determination, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Leavitt, a battle for respect. Leavitt had become a name synonymous with resilience and unapologetic authenticity in a world that too often silenced unconventional voices. A rising star in the realm of independent journalism, was no stranger to hostile interviews or pointed questions. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the day she was invited to a live broadcast at the historic Kensington Broadcasting Centre in London, a venue renowned not just for its iconic architecture and grandeur, but also for hosting some of the most confrontational interviews on air. A week before the fateful broadcast, received an invitation from the London Forum, a high-profile news program known for its razor-sharp questioning and a reputation for belittling younger, progressive voices. Its host, Marcus Donovan, was a seasoned journalist whose career had been built on his unyielding style, his infamous ability to dissect and humiliate his guests, and his unwavering belief that his experience alone granted him the authority to question anyone's credentials. Donovan's approach was simple: provoke, discredit, and if necessary, humiliate. His method was not designed to enlighten or exchange ideas, it was about control, about forcing his guests to prove their worth on his terms. From the moment learned of the interview, she sensed that the encounter would be more than just another question and answer session. The invitation carried with it a subtle threat: you will be cornered, you will be judged, and you will have to fight for every word you speak. Yet wasn't intimidated. Throughout her career, she had faced similar challenges, and with each confrontation, she had grown more confident, more determined to speak her truth. On the day of the broadcast, arrived at Kensington Broadcasting Centre, a modern, glass-fronted building juxtaposed against the age-old charm of the surrounding city. The air was brisk, and as she made her way through the bustling corridors, she couldn't help but notice the palpable sense of expectation among the crew. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and an undercurrent of skepticism. It was clear that not everyone in the building believed that someone like her deserved the opportunity to sit at the table. At the reception, she was met by a middle-aged producer named Oliver Hargreaves, whose thin smile and curt nod did little to warm the chilly reception she felt. A young assistant, Fiona, offered a brief, almost apologetic smile before quickly averting her eyes, as though wary of crossing paths with someone who had so often defied conventional expectations. Yet none of these subtle signals shook Bess' resolve. She had come prepared, armed with meticulous research, an unwavering belief in her work, and an unshakable determination to let her presence speak louder than any snide remark. While seated in the makeup room, as stylists worked carefully to perfect her appearance, S' mind rehearsed what lay ahead. She recalled numerous interviews where she had been cornered, where questions were posed not to foster a dialogue, but to entrap her in a web of assumptions. Marcus Donovan's reputation loomed large in her thoughts, a man who had spent decades mastering the art of the condescending smile and the pointed barb. She had heard how Donovan's words had the weight of an institution's prejudice behind them, designed to undermine anyone who dared to challenge the status quo. And yet, she was ready to challenge him back. A few minutes later, was led into the studio. The set was bathed in blinding lights, its stark modernity contrasting sharply with the historical gravitas of the building itself. The studio's air conditioning did little to counter the chill of the confrontation that was about to unfold. In the front rows, a select audience composed of journalists, media insiders, and influential figures in the industry sat in silence. Their eyes, expectant and critical, were fixed on the scene unfolding before them, a scene that would soon become a turning point in how younger voices were perceived in the world of media. Marcus Donovan was already seated at a sleek, modern desk at the center of the studio. With his legs casually crossed and a practiced smile on his face, he exuded the confident authority of a man who had long since learned to dominate every conversation. As took her seat, he stretched out her name slowly, as if savoring the moment of introducing her to an audience that was likely skeptical of her merits. "Welcome to the show, Leavitt," he intoned, his voice dripping with a veneer of cordiality that barely concealed the challenge beneath. Nodded, thanking him with the poise of someone who had been in this situation before. As Donovan's eyes flickered over her, scanning for any sign of weakness or hesitation, could sense the underlying tone of condescension in his words. His opening remark was a veiled jab, a reminder to her and to everyone watching that she was considered too young, too inexperienced, and perhaps too ambitious to truly command respect in the arena of hard-hitting journalism. Unperturbed, met his gaze evenly. "I believe that experience is not measured solely by the number of years one has worked, but by the actions taken and the results achieved," she replied, her tone steady and measured. This wasn't just a retort, it was a declaration of her belief that competence, drive, and preparation could challenge even the most entrenched notions of authority. Marcus Donovan responded with a short, dismissive laugh, shaking his head as if amused by what he perceived as the typical retort of a young upstart. "Isn't that what every ambitious newcomer says before realizing they're out of their depth?" he challenged, his words dripping with a mix of skepticism and patronization. The studio air seemed to grow even colder as he continued, his tone suggesting that success was a privilege earned only by those who had toilingly paid their dues. S eyes never wavered. She leaned forward slightly, as if to bridge the gap between them with the force of her conviction. "I don't believe that success is tied to an arbitrary timeline," she countered. "If someone is competent, driven, and prepared, why should they have to wait their turn?" Her words were measured yet piercing, designed to cut through the thin veneer of superiority that Donovan had constructed around himself. A faint chuckle rippled through the studio, an acknowledgement, perhaps, from one of the off-camera producers who had expected her to falter at that moment. But did not falter. Instead, she pressed on, unyielding and confident, transforming the dialogue into a battleground where ideas clashed and preconceptions were dismantled. Donovan shifted in his chair, his demeanor momentarily betraying a hint of irritation before he regained his composure. "That sounds convenient," he said, his tone laden with condescension. "But let's be honest, public attention doesn't always equate to quality. In this digital age, it's alarmingly easy to build a following without truly understanding the subject matter." His words were aimed not only at undermining her credibility but also at suggesting that the modern media landscape was rife with empty rhetoric, a realm where her accomplishments could be easily dismissed as superficial. S heartbeat remained steady, her resolve firm. "I think it's rather amusing how often those in power cling to the idea that their way is the only way," she said calmly. "When someone outperforms the established norms, it's not because they're merely riding a wave of digital popularity, it's because they're bringing fresh perspectives and results that speak for themselves." Her response wasn't just a defense, it was a bold assertion that innovation and hard work should be the measures of true expertise, not the arbitrary standards set by a bygone era. The tension in the studio was palpable as Donovan leaned back, his fingers steepled and his gaze narrowing. "Let's talk specifics," he said, a deliberate shift in his tone signaling that he was about to launch into his most calculated line of questioning. "You've positioned yourself as a significant voice in your field, yet when we examine your background, there appears to be a distinct lack of traditional credentials, no decades of experience, no extensive list of leadership roles. Why should anyone trust your perspective over those who have, as they say, paid their dues?" There was a moment of silence as his words hung in the air, a silent challenge to S legitimacy. For a brief moment, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to stumble. Instead, S' response was measured and confident. "I believe that people trust results," she said simply. "When someone is effective and produces meaningful work, the impact is undeniable whether they've been in the game for 2 years or 20. Donovan exhaled sharply, a mix of disbelief and irritation crossing his features. "Results, yes," he scoffed, "but let's be honest, public attention often doesn't reflect quality. We've seen many rise to prominence for reasons that have little to do with substance. The studio audience murmured in agreement with his familiar refrain, their skepticism almost ritualistic in its predictability. However, was undeterred. "I agree that attention alone isn't proof of expertise," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "But if someone remains relevant, if people consistently seek their insights, then that consistency is its own form of credibility. It's not about the number of years you've clocked, and it's about the impact of your work." Her words resonated with an audience that was beginning to question the old guard's insistence on a rigid hierarchy. A subtle shift came over Donovan's expression, a flicker of frustration that he tried desperately to conceal. He leaned forward once more, his voice dropping to a lower, more challenging register. "So, you believe that expertise is irrelevant? That mere results are enough to silence any doubt?" He pressed, his tone nearly incredulous. "What about credibility? How do you defend your record against those who claim that you push narratives designed to fit your own agenda rather than sticking strictly to the facts?" It was a pivot from questioning her experience to questioning her integrity, a maneuver designed to unsettle her by suggesting that her fresh approach was not only inexperienced but possibly even dishonest. For a moment, the studio's tension reached a crescendo as regarded him calmly, her eyes reflecting both determination and a hint of quiet amusement. "That's an accusation easily hurled at anyone who challenges the status quo," she replied steadily. "Critics often prefer to attack the messenger when they can't engage with the substance of the argument. When someone leaves out details that don't support their narrative, they're not necessarily deceiving, they're framing the discussion. Every discussion has multiple angles. I choose to focus on those parts that are most relevant to the point I'm making, just as you do when you ask your probing questions." Her measured tone left no room for misinterpretation. This was not a matter of bias, but of perspective, a perspective that valued dynamic, forward-thinking discourse over static, traditionalism. Donovan's eyes narrowed as he regarded her, his fingers curling around a sheet of paper that he had pulled from a stack on his desk. The paper, a prop meant to serve as undeniable evidence of her alleged shortcomings, was now an instrument of his final attempt to regain control. "You've been accused of pushing narratives that align too neatly with your personal agenda," he said, his voice cool and calculated. "Some critics even suggest that you avoid addressing certain inconvenient facts because they might undermine your argument. Would you say that's a fair assessment?" The question hung heavy in the air. It was a tactic as old as time, a means of diverting attention from substantive discussion by casting aspersions on one's integrity. Regarded the paper for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "I think it's easy to dismiss a perspective simply because it challenges the established order," she said softly. "When critics claim I've omitted details, they're often doing so because the full picture is too complex to fit neatly into their preferred narrative. If you're truly interested in the truth, you're welcome to scrutinize every angle and I'll address any concerns as they arise." Donovan's face betrayed a moment of surprise and acknowledgement that she had not only deflected his attempt at discrediting her but had also turned it into an affirmation of her own method. Yet he wasn't finished. In a measured tone that was both accusatory and incredulous, he pressed on, "What happens when you're proven wrong? When your confidence is challenged by facts that contradict your narrative? Have you ever admitted a mistake in your work?" A beat of silence followed, the studio holding its breath in anticipation. S. eyes remained steady, her voice calm and resolute as she answered, "I have been wrong before, and I have acknowledged my mistakes openly. That's part of the learning process. What sets me apart is that when I realize I'm wrong, I correct it and move forward rather than doubling down just to save face." Her words were a quiet but firm declaration that intellectual honesty was not a weakness, but a strength. At this, the mood in the studio shifted palpably. Donovan's jaw tightened as he absorbed her reply. His next words, however, sought to redirect the focus. "So you're saying that criticism doesn't matter? That you're above it?" he asked, his tone laced with a mixture of disbelief and challenge. "Criticism is valuable, but not all of it is honest. Some of it comes from those who simply refuse to accept a perspective that disrupts their comfortable narrative. Shook her head slightly, her smile subtle yet defiant. I don't say I'm above criticism, she replied evenly. I say that fair criticism that engages with the substance of what I say is valuable. But when the only response to a fresh perspective is to attack the messenger, that's not a genuine critique, it's a rejection of change. Her words seemed to hang in the air, resonating with the audience who were beginning to see the injustice in the old guard's refusal to accept innovation. Donovan's expression hardened. He leaned forward once more, his tone now a blend of controlled frustration and calculated finality. Let's address the issue of control, he said, his voice measured and deliberate. You're sitting in this very seat, a seat that, according to many, you haven't earned. What happens when those who question your right to be here are, in fact, right? Is it possible that you're so confident in your own perspective that you refuse to see the value of experience and time-tested wisdom? For a long, charged moment, the studio was silent. The weight of Donovan's challenge pressed down like a physical force. S eyes met his steadily. That, she said slowly, is the real question. It's not about whether I'm competent or whether my arguments hold up, it's about whether I deserve to be here. And I believe that I do, because I've earned my place by standing up, by producing work that speaks for itself, and by refusing to wait for permission from a system that's designed to keep me out. Her voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of conviction. The tension reached a fever pitch. Donovan's eyes flickered as he absorbed her defiant words. He leaned back, his shoulders tensing, as if searching for a final gambit to regain control. But the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The audience, the crew, and even the off-camera panelists could sense that the balance of power had shifted, was no longer the underdog, she was in command. In a final, desperate attempt, Donovan cleared his throat and said, "You call it confidence, but some would call it arrogance." His words were measured, an effort to reframe the narrative in familiar terms. Smiled a small, knowing smile that conveyed both empathy and unwavering determination. I call it refusing to wait for permission, she replied softly. I call it the strength to claim a seat at the table that was never built for me in the first place. A ripple of murmurs spread through the studio. The tension, once so oppressive, began to dissolve into a mixture of awe and reluctant admiration. Donovan's smirk faltered, replaced by an expression that betrayed a momentary loss of control. The cameras, which had captured every subtle shift in the atmosphere, now recorded a scene that was as much about defying expectations as it was about challenging authority. Realizing that he had exhausted every tactic in his arsenal, Donovan allowed himself a brief pause. He glanced down at his notes, those same notes that had once served as his lifeline, and then, with a resigned gesture, he set them aside. "Leavitt," he said, his voice now lacking the earlier condescension, "thank you for your time." There was an undeniable finality to his words, a reluctant acknowledgement that the conversation had taken a turn that left him without recourse. The studio remained silent as gathered her belongings with measured grace. Unlike many who would have rushed to leave or attempted to salvage some remnant of the encounter, she took her time, allowing the magnitude of the moment to settle over the room. The crew, the producers, and even a junior assistant who had barely spoken a word when she first arrived, all of them witnessed the transformation. Had not only defended her credibility, she had redefined what it meant to claim one's space in an arena dominated by outdated hierarchies. As she stepped out into the cool London evening, the city lights flickering in the distance, took a moment to absorb the significance of what had just transpired. Her phone buzzed incessantly, notifications from viewers and clips from the interview were already circulating online. People were talking not just about the words she had spoken, but about the way she had spoken them, the calm, measured determination that had transformed an anticipated debacle into a moment of undeniable triumph. In the aftermath of the interview, conversations erupted both on social media and within the industry. The narrative had shifted from questioning her credentials to celebrating her ability to dismantle entrenched systems of control. Critics who had once dismissed her as inexperienced began to re-examine their own assumptions about what constituted real expertise. S performance had become a symbol or rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt marginalized or dismissed simply for daring to challenge the status quo. Over the following days, articles, opinion pieces, and discussions proliferated. Some heralded her as a trailblazer, a voice of a new generation that refused to wait for permission to be heard. Others, clinging to the old guard's narrative, attempted to downplay her achievements. Yet the impact was undeniable, had shown that genuine strength lies not in the number of years one has spent in a field, but in the courage to stand up, speak out, and let one's work speak for itself. In one particularly insightful column, a respected media analyst wrote, "Leavitt's confrontation with Marcus Donovan was more than an interview, it was a declaration that credibility is earned by action, not by adherence to outdated standards." Her performance challenges us all to reconsider what truly matters in an era defined by rapid change and relentless innovation. The sentiment resonated widely, echoing the feelings of countless young professionals who had long struggled against a system that prized tradition over talent. As the weeks turned into months, continued to build on that moment. Invitations to speak at conferences, panels, and even other high-stakes interviews began to pour in. With each appearance, she carried the memory of that defining day, the day when a veteran journalist's carefully constructed narrative was dismantled by a simple, unwavering commitment to truth and excellence. In subsequent interviews, when asked about the encounter, would always return to the core of what had happened that day. "It wasn't just about defending myself," she explained in one memorable exchange. "It was about questioning a system that believed it had the right to dictate who was worthy of a platform. I wasn't there to prove that I fit into their mold, I was there to show that a different mold was not only possible, but necessary." Her words inspired a generation of young voices, igniting debates and discussions about the nature of expertise, the value of diverse perspectives, and the urgent need for media to evolve in tandem with the times. S steadfast refusal to be boxed in by outdated expectations became a mantra for those who believed that every voice deserved a chance to contribute, regardless of age or traditional credentials. On the anniversary of the broadcast, Epic Stories dedicated a special segment to recounting the interview, calling it the turning point. In that segment, clips from the interview were interwoven with testimonials from colleagues, industry experts, and even some of Marcus Donovan's former protégés who had come to appreciate the value of challenging the status quo. The segment ended with S simple yet profound statement: "Respect isn't given, it's earned, through hard work, integrity, and the courage to be different." And so, the legacy of that fateful evening at Kensington Broadcasting Centre endured. Leavitt had not only defended her place in the conversation, she had redefined it. Her battle against gatekeeping and arbitrary measures of credibility became a touchstone for anyone who dared to dream big and challenge the norm. In a world where traditional markers of success were often used to silence innovative voices, S story reminded everyone that true impact is measured not in years, but in the relentless pursuit of excellence and the willingness to stand up for what is right. In the wake of the interview, the media landscape began to shift subtly but undeniably. Journalists started to question their own biases about age and experience, and newsrooms that had long relied on the old guard's conventions began to open their doors to fresh talent and innovative perspectives. S victory that day was more than personal, it was a catalyst for change, sparking a broader conversation about the future of media and the importance of inclusivity in a rapidly evolving world. As the final notes of the interview echoed in the minds of viewers, one thing became clear: Leavitt had not merely defended herself against a barrage of condescending questions, she had asserted a timeless truth. In a society that often equates age with wisdom, she proved that true wisdom is the result of hard work, continuous learning, and the courage to embrace new ideas. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that the fight for respect and recognition is ongoing, and that every time someone dares to challenge the status quo, they contribute to a richer, more diverse dialogue that benefits us all. A new chapter in the Epic Stories legacy. This isn't just a tale of an interview gone awry, it's a chronicle of resilience in the face of entrenched power. defiant stand in that studio wasn't merely a rebuttal to one man's condescension, it was a rallying cry for a generation that refuses to be constrained by outdated norms. At Epic Stories, we celebrate moments like these, moments that inspire us to question, to push boundaries, and to redefine what it means to be truly qualified. If you found this story as compelling and transformative as we did, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Epic Stories for more groundbreaking narratives, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together, we can keep challenging the narrative. Epilogue: The Enduring Impact. In the months following that electrifying broadcast, the ripple effects of S' performance continued to reverberate across the media landscape. In interviews with other rising stars, many cited her confrontation with Marcus Donovan as the moment they decided to pursue their careers on their own terms, rejecting the notion that traditional credentials and long-established reputations were the only keys to success. Instead, they embraced a new paradigm where innovation, authenticity, and resilience were celebrated above all else. Critics who had once dismissed as merely a flash in the pan began to re-evaluate their opinions as her body of work grew, each piece marked by the same fearless pursuit of truth that had defined that day in the studio. In academic circles, discussions about the evolving nature of expertise and credibility increasingly referenced her interview as a case study in modern journalism. Seminars, workshops, and even university courses began to include S' approach as an example of how young professionals can navigate and ultimately reshape a field dominated by traditional hierarchies. Marcus Donovan, for his part, was forced to reckon with the shifting tide. In subsequent interviews, he appeared more reflective, occasionally even conceding that the landscape of journalism was changing faster than he had anticipated. Though he never publicly admitted defeat, his later commentary hinted at an acknowledgement of the merit in fresh perspectives, an acknowledgement that, in many ways, validated S' stand. Leavitt's journey, marked by that defining confrontation, has become an enduring beacon for anyone who has ever felt marginalized or underestimated. Her story is a reminder that the courage to speak one's truth in the face of overwhelming opposition can spark change far beyond the confines of a television studio. It is a testament to the idea that every challenge is an opportunity, a chance to reshape the conversation, to redefine credibility, and to build a legacy that transcends the limitations imposed by outdated systems. As we close this chapter on one of the most riveting confrontations in modern journalism, remember that this story is not just about one woman's triumph, it's about the power of resilience, the importance of authenticity, and the undeniable truth that respect must be earned, not given. S' bold stand invites each of us to look at our own lives and ask, when faced with doubt, will we shrink away, or will we stand our ground and let our actions speak louder than the critics? Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. We hope S' story inspires you to challenge the norms, embrace your unique path, and never be afraid to claim your place at the table. Remember, every voice matters in the tapestry of change, and sometimes, it only takes one courageous person to ignite a revolution. If you were moved by S' defiant stand and the powerful message she conveyed, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Here at Epic Stories, we're dedicated to bringing you narratives that challenge the status quo and inspire change. Your engagement helps us continue to unearth and share these transformative moments with the world.